Hello, welcome to this edition of Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man. And in this edition, I'd like to discuss with you dyslexia and a solution for a certain experience of dyslexia. I was diagnosed autistic in 2002 when I was 40. And when I went to university for the first time, later that year in October 2002, I slipped through the net because I wasn't used to talking about being autistic. I wasn't used to discussing it. So I didn't talk to my tutors about it at all. It wasn't until towards the end of the year that the university suddenly went, "Oh, hold on a minute. We've got an autistic student who hasn't even been seen by our support department." So I went to the support department. They interviewed me and said that I would need an assessment at Southampton University. So I went to Southampton University, and they discovered something about my brain that I didn't know. And that is that I have a propensity for self-correcting. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm self-criticizing and sort of going, "You did that wrong." I mean, I do that anyway. But that's not what they meant, right? What they meant was that if I write a paragraph, say that if I was going to write a post on Facebook or something like that, so if I write a paragraph, a message or something, when I look at what I've written, I'm not looking at what I've written. What I'm attending to or paying attention to, what I'm lending the eye of my attention to, isn't the words I've actually typed on the screen. No, I'm seeing my memory of my intention. And of course, because my intention is to write clearly, perfectly, for there to be no typos at all, when I look at what I've written, there are no typos. Now, my autism comes packaged with dyspraxia as well, which means involuntary movements of my hands. And sometimes I write the word T-E-H instead of T-H-E, getting the E and the H the wrong way round. Right? The same thing also happens with the last letter of a word and the space and the first letter of the next word. Sometimes the first letter of the next word ends up there and the space is in between the next word. And I can't see this in real time because when I look at something that I've written, I don't see what I've written. I see my memory of my intention. It's only if I get distracted, go off, make a cup of tea, someone phones, anything that kind of dissociates me from the memory itself. When I look at what I've written completely afresh, now suddenly I can see all the typos. And I thought, well, this is interesting. So I tested it on Facebook at the time. I put a post up saying, "To my dyslexic friends, is it the case that you can't see your own typos, but you can easily see the typos of everyone else and typos in magazines and books and things?" And people went, "Yeah, because dyslexics are always told they can't see typos, but they can. It's just they can't see the typos they've just written that are still within memory." Self-correcting. Who would have thought that? I thought that was fascinating to discover that. When I went to back to university and began writing my next papers, I was allocated a support worker who was wonderful. I'm not going to say her name, but if she ever sees this, she'll know exactly who I mean. Right? And she guided me through my Master of Arts in Cultural Astronomy and Astrology. And I worked to the extent that I got a distinction for my dissertation. This was a huge triumph for me because I'd never done any previous education. I did a master's degree from a standing start with no A levels, no previous degree. I saw in the May of that year, in the May of 2002, in an astrology periodical, there was an advertisement for this MA. the first astrology course to be held on British university soil for 400 years. A very historic thing indeed. My wife at the time said, "You must give this a go." But I'd never done anything like that. Well, give it a go anyway, see what happens. So I found out at the university, and I've been teaching hypnotherapy for a while. So, I spoke in a charming way to the receptionist, and they put me through to the man who was the head of department, a man called Michael York, who later became the world's first professor of astrology. And I'm very glad to say that we are still in communication. We are still friends to this day. He's a wonderful man. Anyway, I got an interview with him. And so I drove to this university in a town I'd never really been to before. I got lost being autistic. I was an hour late for the interview. And so by the time I eventually found his office, there's this rather slightly irritated man. And within 20 minutes, we were getting on like a house on fire. And other people doing this course, this flagship return to academia, were people who were authors of astrology. In fact, a lot of them were the authors of books on my shelves, And I used to say, this is like having guitar lessons with Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton. That's how it felt from an astrological viewpoint. And I felt very much a fish out of water. I'd never written an essay in my life. I didn't even know what referencing was. Right. Very patiently, Nick Campion very kindly, when I'd handed my first papers in, called me in before time really started. We had a long conversation about my history paper and the errors in it and what I need to change and what I need to adapt. And I recorded it on cassette tape and I played it back in the car as I drove home, telling my unconscious, please pay attention to this. And my next paper got better marks and then better marks. And eventually I got a distinction for my dissertation. So when it came to doing my Master of Science degree about 4 years later at University West of England, I put in a request to have the same support worker through the university system. And they somehow did their administration. And so the same lady guided me through this one. And at one stage, I think it was in the prelude to writing my dissertation for it, we met up and I mentioned to her that I was having the headaches when I was reading books on brain maturation and brain development. I better let you know, I had a very fractured education. I left school with no qualifications whatsoever at all, nothing. I mean, zero. I only had about 1 or 2 biology lessons in the whole of my education from the age of 10 until when I left. So I didn't know anything about brain anatomy. I didn't know anything about anatomy. And I found myself with piles of astrology books, piles of neuroscience books, writing a science paper and thinking to myself, there's no way my younger self could have ever envisioned that I'd be doing this. But one of the things that assisted me in this was I met up with the support worker one lunchtime, and I mentioned I was having headaches when I was reading. And she said, I wonder if you've got some dyslexia as well, because my Asperger's syndrome was well documented. And she said, we have color acetates. They're like A4 pieces of clear plastic that have colors: yellow, orange, blue, green, red. And they're overlays. And if you put them on top of a page of text, it can make it easier to distinguish the words and therefore clearer to read. And she gave me a couple of colors to put on top of a book just to see. And it did make a difference. But I said, I can't do this. I said, my dyspraxia, which is a motor coordination issue thing, makes it hard for me to literally hold a book anyway. I find I love books, but I find the physicality of holding a book challenging. It's quite painful. And so to hold a book and also to hold a thing on top of it. Couldn't do it. And then I can't remember which one of us it was came up with it, but there was an idea, and that was to see whether or not, because I've got reading glasses, prescription reading glasses, is it possible to get the colour put in the lens of the glasses? At this time, this would have been in 2009. I was, like I said, I was in that prelude of studying and researching, building up ideas ready for the dissertation. And one of the books that I was looking at was this wonderful thing. It's called Chaos and Complexity in Psychology, the Theory of Nonlinear Dynamical Systems, edited by, well, you can see those very difficult to pronounce names. I'll put the names properly later. But this, I just had this feeling I should read this because there's a book that I will talk about on its own. It has the merit of having its own thing called The Web of Life by Fritjof Capra. And it's a fantastic thing, quite life-changing in a way from a philosophical perspective. And in that book, there's a chapter on the mathematics of chaos and complexity and attractor systems. And I knew that this book has those things. And these readers have applied like chaos theory to psychology. Definitely worth a read. Really hard to read. It's so hard to read this thing. Wow. I'd had this book for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. And I was on page 6. And I started to read page 6. And by the time I got to the bottom, well, in fact, more before I got to the bottom of the page, I'd be asleep. And I'd sleep for about, I don't know, half an hour to 2 hours. It just knocked me out. And then, I'd try and read it. And every time I tried to read it, I'd get so far down the page and just zone out. I just couldn't do it. It was physically painful to read it. It was almost as if my brain couldn't create the synaptic junctions to be able to kind of carry the words. That's how it felt. Almost like, if you have a train of thought, then that you've found some terrain where you cannot build track. That's how it felt. And so I went along to my local opticians in Chippenham in Wiltshire. And I mentioned this problem to an optician. And they said, we can do that. We have a facility here where we can test the colours, and then we'll do, your prescription glasses with those colours. Okay. So went into this room, and they had just a piece of text in the middle of this white space. You look through these kind of goggles, and they can put colours and overlays in between, but not just kind of red or green, but multiple shades of red, multiple shades of blue. So you can refine exactly what colour and shade of colour works for you. So a couple of weeks later, I went back and I discovered these. I quite like them, I have to say. But I picked up this. As soon as I got them, I got home, I picked this thing up, and I sat down on the sofa with a cup of tea, put these on, and started to read. And within half an hour, I was on page 13. And I found not only did it make it easy for me to see the text more clearly, it made it easier for me to integrate it, to take it in, to assimilate meaning. So it's not just the kind of acquisition of words, it's the comprehension of words that gets adjusted by this. It's not just changing my optic vision, it was changing my kind of comprehension ability as well. And I went back to the opticians and I gave them that feedback as well. This doesn't just help your eye, it helps your brain. It's rather cool. So my reason for telling you about these wonderful things is that there will be occasion when I'm reading things out of books, and if it's something that I really want to concentrate on, or might take a bit of time, therefore I could get fatigue, I should be wearing these. So now you know why, and you're not just going to go, oh, he's trying to look cool or something. No, no, there's a purpose and a function behind these wonderful things. Yeah. So yeah, it's a fascinating thing. I also, at the same time as doing that, I did a thing called photo reading. And photo reading is a hypnotic technique of being able to get a whole book into your brain in 10 minutes. And yes, I did just say of being able to get a whole book into your brain in 10 minutes. All of the people that I've helped with exams in the last 34 odd years have passed with credits or distinctions, including me. And so that would be a session on its own because it merits a focused attention. Okay, so that's just a short one for now. Yes, the purpose and reason for the dyslexics friends. Mm. Take care. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you again. Bye.